Hey everyone, I just played Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip, and it was unhinged. Developed by Snackflat and published by Super Rare Originals in 2024, it's a car-based open-world collectathon in the style of such early 2000s bangers as The Simpsons Hit and Run and The Simpsons Hit and Run, with a little bit of The Simpsons Hit and Run thrown in for good measure. The game is a lot like The Simpsons Hit and Run is what I'm saying. You can see its influence shining through every single pixel, but that is in no way a bad thing. Hit and Run never got a sequel despite fan demand for one right up to the present day, and as a spiritual successor, Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip is everything I could have hoped for in an updated take on the concept and more. It is a love letter to games of the early 2000s, with an absolutely bonkers sense of humour, so let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, this video and everything I make on the channel is now made possible by the generous people supporting me on Patreon. So if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. And if you don't want to give Patreon money or can't support monthly, Ko-Fi is also an option. Links are in the description. And if financial support isn't possible but you still want to help the channel out, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video around because YouTube sure won't. Anyway, let's get to it. This is Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip. I wanted to get the comparison to The Simpsons Hit and Run out of the way immediately because I don't actually want to dwell on it too much. That game was very obviously a big inspiration on Snackflat when it came to Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip, but it's not just a spiritual successor to that earlier title. It has its own identity as a video game, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the writing. This game is insane. Every conversation left me floored or confused in the best way. One of the biggest reasons I 100%ed the game was in order to get as much of the dialogue as possible, and it's not like it starts off relatively normal and ramps up into silliness. No, it just tosses you in the deep end of its madness and expects you to keep up. The very first interaction you have in the game is with a guy called Groany. Groany is actually the game's hint system. You can call him whenever you like if you're stuck on where to go next, and he gives you his phone number during this opening conversation. It's 1. Just 1? The reason you meet Groany is because Terry's at a job centre looking for a car. He wants a car because he wants to drive to space. The town in which the game is set is famous for having the world's most car crashes. The mayor had a monument built to distract from that fact, which is itself a giant ramp leading up into the sky with no door to actually enter the thing. Terry has a lifetime supply of excruciatingly salty beach fries that is putting the shop that sells them out of business. Also on the beach is a man in the process of spontaneously combusting, too stubborn to find some shade because he thinks everyone wants his spot. The kids at the summer school tied up their teacher and shoved them in a cupboard so they could play football. Another kid is making bank, giving stolen cars to his dad to sell on, because if they're sold again, that means they're no longer stolen, right? And not only can Terry join him in a little thievery, you can call up Groany to discuss whether it's unethical to sell stolen cars for a profit. Yes, the townsfolk have a rich tradition of burying money, which is why you can dig up so much all over the place. They have artificial pets called gummy pups that represent each of the town's values, like converting mud into electricity, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Every conversation is a descent into madness where Terry is simultaneously the straight man and the wise guy, aware that everything going on around him is completely bonkers, but he just goes along with it anyway. Terry might actually be the most normal person in the game, which is saying a lot because he is explicitly a child enrolled in summer school, but also can drive and successfully gets a car looking for a job at an employment centre. And the discord between those aspects of his character are just never reconciled, but somehow they never clash either. Everything about this world and the people in it is unhinged, so a kid wanting to drive up the side of a building into into space doesn't even really register as odd when compared to the mayor blowing up like a balloon and floating away into the sky at the end of his one and only physical appearance in the whole game. It helps that all of this is played completely straight. There's never a moment where the game devolves into irony or Terry turns to the camera and goes, "Well, that just happened." It's all sincere in a very charming way, and despite how silly so much of the game is, there are moments where things can get pretty relatable. Terry has a huge crush on Spepley, the girl who runs the job centre, and the awkward way he tries to talk to her and impress her feels very true to life. The game doesn't really have a story. The only definite plot beats are the opening cutscene at the job centre and the ending, but what's fun is that by allowing the player to tackle every area of the map in any order they want, everyone will end up with a unique narrative experience, with its own sense of pacing, its own ebb and flow, as you complete the various objectives people have for Terry around the place. And I think that was the right call, because it means you don't get bombarded with the game's insanity the whole way through. If you need a break from Tiny Terry's sense of humour, the game will allow you to explore an area of the map you haven't gone to yet, or to clean up a bunch of collectibles in some out-of-the-way corner. And these periods of organic, player-paced downtime make the high points hit that much harder. It's great. The game has a very cartoonish art style to go with the cartoonish writing. Everyone looks like they're made out of clay, and the shader that gives all the characters a rough, warping edge gives the impression they're being animated by hand right in front of you, even if it's still a little too artificially smooth to match real-life claymation. It's a very versatile visual style that allows for dynamic movement and a wide array of silhouettes. In fact, aside from the generic pedestrian NPCs walking the streets, it's impossible to mistake one character for another. Everyone with a name stands out, and thus read as important when you see them through a crowd. The bouncing idle animations and quickly changing mouths just complete the image. Outside of the characters, the visual style is a little less expressive. The buildings and the vehicles and the landscape aren't bad, but a lot of them do fade into the background. Although not, ironically, the tower at the Gummy Pup Memorial Park, which literally does fade into the background. To offset this, the game gives a lot of personality to its parks and beaches and streets by filling them with NPCs, whether it's pedestrians, or traffic, or insects, or... Is that? The game makes these places worth exploring too, by filling them with circles of junk to dig up, and other collectibles caught in an updraft, and taken all together, it breathes so much life into the world, even when you're travelling far away from the centre of town to some random desert highway. The sound design does a lot of heavy lifting too, from the honking of car horns to the honking of pedestrian traffic, to the honking of the insects hopping through the grass. It's a very lively soundscape. All of it is very nice to listen to, but I have to highlight the dialogue. Everything is communicated through text, but characters still talk in that way everyone in old rare collectathons from the 1990s did, and Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip might be the best example of that style in my opinion. Not only does everyone with a name have a unique voice, but the individual sounds they make are incredible. You hear them and you know exactly what sort of character you're talking to. Terry's a lovable doofus. Breen Clap is a wizened old man. Sneckfret, not to be confused with the developer Sneckflet, is a jaded hospitality worker. Groany's just a cool dude. But my favourite has to be Ricky. Ricky is me and I am Ricky. Just listen to him. Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip also has a fantastic soundtrack, reminiscent of, you know, the other game, with its emphasis on horns and brass, but with its own fun new spin on things too. The driving music especially was a highlight. but the track that plays around the pet shop and the funky little number that you can only hear around the machine that converts mud into electricity are both great too. In fact, I wish the tracks were longer. It feels like they all start to loop right after they hit their stride. The vehicle noises are also quite reminiscent of that other game too, the screech of the tyres especially, which I'm certain was by design. But again, Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip does put its own spin on things, like the single frames pause whenever you whack some pedestrians with a pipe or a bat. I know it has a technical name, but I can't remember what it is and don't know how to look it up, which, when combined with the sound design, give each strike much more impact than they would otherwise have. Good as the presentation is, there are still some kinks to iron out, but honestly, I think the bugs only add to the game's charm. Stuff like Breen Clap's name being in Korean for some reason, and I honestly can't tell if that's a bug or intentional, because he's such an old-school Western hippie, and taking an Asian name is what some old-school Western hippies did indeed do back in the day. I'm a bit more convinced that things like cars popping in and out of existence, and pedestrians falling through the floor or out of the sky aren't meant to happen, but that doesn't make them any less funny to encounter, and it certainly didn't ruin the tone. What kind of did was the fixed camera angles on the building interiors. Most of the interiors are a single room with a single point of view, but on the few exceptions that it did feature multiple areas with multiple angles, it was easy to get caught between them whenever they'd switch suddenly. It wasn't exactly a deal breaker. I forgot it had even happened by the time I sat down to write this script, and only remembered reading through my notes again, but it is something to keep in mind. Not that I'd want the angles themselves changed or removed. They suit each area perfectly well, and certainly bring to mind that other game I've been trying to tiptoe around ever since the introduction. They provide a nice contrast to the pulled back third-person perspective of the rest of the game too, and definitely make navigating building interiors easier overall. With the camera pulled out this far, I can easily imagine it getting caught on walls and ceilings and bits of detail, but the sudden way the controls shift with every camera transition definitely could have been tightened up a bit as well. To break my own rule for a moment, it's gameplay where Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip most resembles its most obvious influence, though not as much as you might think at first glance. A lot of the game is still spent driving around, picking up coins, and doing odd jobs for people, but it features almost none of the mission styles the Simpsons Hit and Run is most famous for. No follow another car at a distance missions, no destroy X number of cars in Y minutes missions, no pick up 20 bits of garbage in a time limit missions, not even any races. The closest Tiny Terry comes to hit and run style mission design are the gladiatorial car battles with Ricky. And I've got to mention, after tossing him into the fucking garbage all through my first unrecorded playthrough and in our initial battle here, I was not expecting him to completely stomp my ass on the rematch. Holy shit. Otherwise, Tiny Terry's mission structure is entirely unique. Yeah, there's still one or two objectives that amount to collect enough cash to continue, or drive this stolen car over to this specific place so you can sell it at a profit, but there's a lot more to it than that. Play some footy with the gang, catch some bugs, slow down and do some yoga. I hate this minigame, by the way, I'm so bad at it, and I don't know why. Something about the controls, which seem to switch positions to the wrong angle at the last second half the time, or the timing, which just feels off to me, or I don't know what, but I just can't stand it. The second I got the minimum number of chakras aligned, I was out of there like the tightly wound bouncy ball of stress that I am. My point is, for a game based around driving, not many missions actually involve the mechanic all that much, which you could say is an oversight, but I think it works. I think it helps Tiny Terry stand out, and it certainly keeps the game from becoming overly repetitive like some titles I could mention. Another thing that sets Tiny Terry apart is it's almost completely non-linear. Like I said before, you can complete each person's odd job in any order you like, which allows the player to set the pace of the experience. And there's a bunch of other stuff to do outside of those main missions as well, such as collecting gummy pup blueprints or buying hats, which keeps things from getting stale. It can seem like a lot to keep track of, but everything is recorded on Terry's map, even the stuff you haven't discovered yet, and the icons will slowly pulse whenever you're in a position to continue a quest. And if you ever find yourself really stuck, you can always call up Grony or visit the laundromat for a nudge in the right direction. I especially found the map helpful just letting me know where all the roads were. The game world might be pretty small, and each area might be distinct in architecture, terrain, and colour palette, but I just could not navigate between them. All the roads and highways seemed to loop back in on each other, and it usually took me a few circuits of the town or the beach to find my way to the correct turn-off for a quick getaway, which is another reason I'm kind of glad there aren't any big map-wide races. Not that I'd really mind if there were, because the driving is pretty good. Terry's main car handles the best out of all the vehicles, but the whole lot are fine. It's just that much easier to bump a corner and spin out when you're not behind the wheel of the single-seat taxicab. And you'll definitely spin out at least once, because the traffic AI is just as brain-dead in-game as it is in real life. The amount of times a car merged right into me was insane, and also in the game, and they have no qualms about crushing Terry under the wheels, though most of the time they just sent him flying halfway across the street. At least they've got a good sense of comedic timing. One slammed into me right as I was getting into position to make the final drive into outer space at the very end of the game. Another time one drove right up my arse, and stayed there until I hopped out and helped them with finding the handbrake. At least the traffic jams you can cause by parking in the middle of the road were funny. Anyway, all of this is done in service of collecting turbo junk, which is needed to upgrade Terry's car so he can drive it to space. A lot of turbo junk is just lying out in the street. In fact, in the early game, the town is overflowing with it, but completing each mission will net you a canister of the stuff worth 100 pieces each, 2/3 of the price of an upgrade. You don't need every single upgrade to complete the game. In fact, I'd highly recommend you don't aim for 100% completion for reasons I'll get into in just a moment, but it is certainly fun collecting enough to turbo boost down the highway for what feels like hours. I really appreciate how you can get multiple upgrades at once if you arrive at the garage with more than enough turbo junk. It saves so much time. It's a great quality of life addition. Turbo junk is not the game's only currency though. The stuff is only good for car upgrades. Everything else has to be bought with cold hard cash, but thankfully the game is overflowing with banknotes too. You can find fat stacks everywhere, buried underground, in the split from selling off a stolen car, in wallets pedestrians foolishly drop on the ground after you bash their skulls in with a pipe. You won't want for it is what I'm saying. Even the most expensive items and missions aren't that hard to save up for. Searching out all the turbo junk though, that's a little harder. If Tiny Terry's turbo trip has any negative quality, it's that the game is also kind of a grind. There is a finite amount of turbo junk located around the island, and you will need to find and collect all of it in order to achieve 100%, which is honestly not worth it. Early on, the place is overflowing with turbo junk, but as the game goes on and you complete more objectives and clear out more areas, it quickly drains away to a trickle, and it quickly becomes a chore scanning through each area to find what you've missed. There are some bits of turbo junk that can only be reached by doing a trick jump off a ramp with a car, or climbing to the top of a building with the game's extremely janky jumping mechanics, both of which are very easy to fuck up. Both of which are very tedious to reset for a second attempt, to say nothing of the junk buried in random out-of-the-way places of the map. Not the X marks the spot treasure hunts that are given as rewards for jobs well done and shown on the map, but the unmarked fairy circles hidden about the place. It's easy to miss one or two bits of junk while running through the town early on, but you'll be kicking yourself several hours later when you find yourself a few dozen pieces short and have to backtrack all over the place to finish the things off. And keep in mind, this is with the help of a hat that will beep whenever you get close to a piece of junk. The item description even says it'll help you find those last pesky pieces of turbo junk lying around the place, and it still felt like a chore to complete. It still took 5.5 hours to hit 100% on my initial run, a full 3 hours longer than this recorded playthrough where I only collected enough to finish the game. I don't even want to think about how long it might take without that crutch. Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip is a charming little game, but the second the mechanical loop flips from collectathon to grind, it loses a lot of its appeal, especially since by that point you'll probably have exhausted all the story-based side quests and have nothing else to do but go over the environment with a fine-toothed comb, which really puts a dent in how vibrant and alive the world comes off as early on. I finished this recorded playthrough at only 56% complete, with a time of 2.5 hours, and I was more than satisfied with the experience. I can only recommend going for the full 100% if you really love the game, or if you're a compulsive completionist. Otherwise, it's simply not worth it. The late game grind really brings into focus just how broken the jumping can be too. So much of those extra 3 hours were spent trying to leap awkwardly from roof to roof in pursuit of some bit of junk or another. You can attack in mid-air to get a little bit of a height boost, and once or twice that did actually help me get up over a particularly frustrating ledge, but just as often it did nothing, and the terrain is so slippery that a lot of the time I ended up hurling myself off the surface anyway in an attempt to stay on target. The vague dimensions of the hitboxes didn't help either, but there are items that help mitigate the problem, and again, like with the grind overall, the jumping problems are not something that's even really noticeable if you're not interested in going for that 100%, but boy do they turn the late game into an exercise in tedium if you do. These things may not have ruined the experience, but they definitely stood out much more prominently once I completed everything else the game had to offer. Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip is a charming little open-world collectathon that is absolutely worth your time if you're a fan of old-school early 2000s titles of a similar nature. Cracks might start to appear in the mechanics if you go for a 100% completion run, but the game has so much style and such a magnetic sense of humour that I still walked away satisfied. It scratched a mechanical itch I didn't know I still had. It introduced me to a world that's as captivating as it is crazy, and even with the late game grind, it never put me off. I, for one, welcome the arrival of hit and run likes, hopefully the first of many to come. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Jeffiet, Marcy May, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Guinea Pig, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, This Sauerkraut, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. So if you thought this game had some wild conversations, you are not prepared for what's up next. We're going to keep riding this river of madness a little bit longer. Look out for that soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.